Clara shuffled around her small old house in Brookville, her steps slow but steady. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains. She paused by the kitchen window, gazing out at her modest garden. The tomatoes were ripening, a splash of red amidst the green leaves. The distant hum of cars and the occasional chirping of birds. She filled a bowl with birdseed and stepped onto the porch. The birds, familiar with her routine, fluttered down, pecking eagerly at the seeds. Clara watched them with a small smile, finding some solace in their presence. Her children, now grown, were scattered across the country. They visited once a month, a visit that Clara both anticipated and dreaded. They would take her pension money, leaving her with just enough to scrape by. She never complained, never voiced her disappointment. It was easier that way. She moved to the kitchen, opening the cupboard to find it nearly bare. A loaf of bread, a small block of cheese, a few cans of soup. She closed the cupboard and took a deep breath, pushing back the wave of loneliness that threatened to overwhelm her. As she prepared a simple breakfast, the mail slot clattered. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front door, bending down to pick up the letters. Among the usual bills and advertisements, a letter from Sarah caught her eye. She tore it open with eager fingers. "Dear Mom," it began, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. How are you holding up? I know it's been tough since Dad passed, and I'm sorry I can't be there more often. I'm planning to visit soon, maybe next month. I miss you." Clara's eyes welled up with tears. She missed Sarah terribly. Sarah, the only one who seemed to care, the only one who wrote regularly. Clara held the letter to her chest for a moment, feeling the connection despite the miles between them. The days were long and lonely, but she found small ways to keep herself busy. After breakfast, she would tend to her garden, pulling weeds and watering the plants. In the afternoons, she would sit on the porch, knitting or reading. The evenings were the hardest, the shadows growing long and the silence pressing in. One evening, Clara decided to call her eldest son, hoping for a brief conversation. The phone rang and rang before finally going to voicemail. She left a message, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "Hi, it's me. Just wanted to hear your voice. Call me when you can." She hung up and stared at the phone for a long time, willing it to ring. It didn't. As the days turned into weeks, Clara's routine remained the same. She would rise with the sun, tend to her garden, and go about her day. The small pleasures, watching the birds, reading Sarah's letters, tending to her plants, were her lifelines. One morning, as she was watering the garden, she noticed the car pulling into the driveway. Her heart leapt, hoping it was Sarah, but it was her second son, Tom. He got out, looking harried and distracted. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving her a quick hug. "Just here to pick up some money." Clara nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, dear. Come in." Inside, Tom took the envelope she handed him without much conversation. He glanced at the nearly empty cupboards, but said nothing. "Thanks, Mom. I'll see you next month," he said, giving her another quick hug before leaving. Clara watched him drive away, the weight of loneliness settling back on her shoulders. She sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where Tom had just stood. Later that day, she wrote a letter back to Sarah, pouring out her thoughts and feelings. She didn't want to worry her daughter, but she needed someone to talk to. "Dear Sarah," she wrote, "I miss you too. Things are the same here, quiet and lonely. Your brother's visit, but it's not the same. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Take care, my dear." She sealed the letter and placed it on the table, ready to mail the next day. As she sat back, she glanced at the garden, finding a small measure of peace in the growing plants. The days were long, but the promise of Sarah's visit gave her something to hold on to. The sun hung low in the sky as Clara made her way to the bustling marketplace in Brookville. The air was thick with the smell of fresh bread and ripe fruit, a stark contrast to the emptiness of her own pantry. She clutched her worn purse, the one with the fraying edges, and felt the weight of the coins inside, barely enough for a loaf of bread. Her steps were slow, hesitant. Clara had always prided herself on her independence, but today, desperation gnawed at her. Her children had promised to help, but their promises had become as hollow as her cupboards. She needed food, and there was no one else to turn to. As she entered the market, the noise and activity seemed overwhelming. Stalls lined both sides of the street, vendors calling out their wares, and customers haggling for better prices. Clara swallowed hard, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her. She approached the first stall, the vendor's cheerful demeanor dimming as she timidly asked, "Could I have a small loaf, please?" The vendor, a burly man with a kind face, hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't give it away. Business is tough for everyone these days." Clara nodded, the rejection stinging more than she'd anticipated. She moved on, her eyes scanning the crowd for a friendly face, but each encounter was the same. Polite refusals, hurried glances, people too busy with their own lives to notice the quiet desperation in her eyes. She stopped in front of a fruit stall, the vibrant colors of apples and oranges almost mocking her. A young woman behind the counter gave her a sympathetic smile. "Anything I can help you with, ma'am?" she asked. Clara's voice trembled. Just an apple, if you can spare it." The young woman's smile faltered. "I wish I could, but my boss is very strict. I'm sorry." Clara's shoulders sagged. She turned away, feeling the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She shuffled to a quieter corner of the market, leaning against a lamppost to steady herself. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. Just then, the roar of an engine cut through the market's noise. A luxurious jeep pulled up to the curb, its polished exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun. Clara barely noticed until the driver's door opened and a well-dressed young man stepped out. "Clara?" His voice was incredulous. Clara looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Michael, is that you?" Michael, once the little boy who lived next door, now stood before her, taller and more confident than she remembered. He rushed over, his face a mix of shock and concern. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Clara's lips trembled as she tried to form an answer. I ran out of food. I didn't know where else to go." Michael's expression softened. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." Without waiting for her response, he guided her through the market, his presence commanding attention. Vendors who had turned her away now offered smiles and discounts, but Michael waved them off, leading her to a small cafe at the edge of the market. They sat at a corner table, and Michael ordered a meal for Clara. As she ate, he watched her, concern etched into his features. Michael said, "You took care of me when I needed it most. Let me help you now." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't blink them away. She let them fall, feeling the warmth of Michael's words wrap around her like a comforting embrace. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. As they left the cafe, Michael made a promise. "I'm going to make sure you're taken care of, Clara. You deserve that much." Clara nodded, a small spark of hope igniting within her. She didn't know what the future held, but with Michael by her side, it didn't seem quite as daunting. The sun had set by the time they returned to her house. Michael helped her inside, his presence a reassuring constant. Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her, the promise of better days ahead easing the weight on her heart. After Clara finished her meal, Michael drove her home. As Michael pulled his Jeep into the driveway, Clara felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. She had always prided herself on being independent, but the reality of her situation was now laid bare. Michael stepped out of the car, his expression a mix of determination and concern. "Clara, let's get you inside," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I can manage, Michael," Clara replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Michael insisted, opening the car door for her and helping her out. "You shouldn't have to." Clara sighed but didn't argue. She felt a deep gratitude, mingled with a touch of pride. She wasn't used to accepting help, especially from someone she'd watched grow up. As they walked towards the house, Clara glanced at Michael. "You've grown so much," she said, a hint of nostalgia in her voice. "I remember when you used to run around this yard chasing after butterflies." Michael chuckled. "And you always had a Band-Aid ready for my scraped knees." They entered the house, the familiar creak of the floorboards welcoming them. Clara moved to the kitchen, where she began to put away the few groceries Michael had insisted on buying. He joined her, deftly organizing the pantry. "You don't have to do that," Clara said, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a can. "Let me help," Michael replied, gently taking the can from her and placing it on the shelf. "You've done enough on your own." Clara's eyes softened. "You're a good man, Michael. I'm proud of you." Michael paused, looking at her. "You were there for me when I needed it. Now it's my turn." As they worked together, Clara's mind drifted back to when Michael was a child. His parents had often been absent, leaving him to fend for himself. Clara had taken him under her wing, offering him meals and a safe place to stay. She remembered his eager eyes as he watched her cook, his small hands helping with simple tasks. "Remember the first time you made pancakes?" Clara asked, smiling at the memory. Michael laughed. "I burned half of them, and you still said they were the best pancakes you'd ever had." "They were, because you made them," Clara said softly. Michael finished organizing the pantry and turned to Clara. "How about we make dinner together, just like old times?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They moved around the kitchen in a familiar dance, Clara giving directions and Michael following them with ease. As they cooked, they talked about the past, sharing stories and laughter. The house, which had felt so empty, now seemed filled with warmth and life. "I've missed this," Michael said, stirring a pot of soup. "Cooking with you." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening. "So have I." After dinner, Michael helped with the dishes, his movements practiced and efficient. Clara watched him, her heart swelling with pride and affection. "You've become quite the chef," she remarked. "I had a good teacher," Michael replied, his smile genuine. When the kitchen was clean, they moved to the living room. Michael sat on the old, worn couch while Clara settled into her favorite armchair. They continued talking, their conversation flowing easily, bridging the years of absence. "Do you remember the time you tried to fix the fence and ended up breaking more of it?" Clara teased. Michael grinned. "You mean the time I learned that not all heroes are handy with a hammer?" Clara laughed, the sound rich and full. It had been a long time since she had felt this light. As the evening wore on, Michael finally stood up to leave. "I should go, but I'll be back tomorrow. We'll get this place sorted out." Clara stood too, feeling a pang of sadness at his departure, but also hope for the promise of his return. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." He hugged her gently. "It's the least I can do, Clara. I'll see you soon." As she watched him drive away, Clara felt a warmth spread through her. She had faced many struggles, but tonight she felt a little less alone. And that made all the difference. Clara's home had a certain quietness about it, a kind of stillness that only came with age. A few days after Michael's unexpected visit, the same stillness was broken by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Clara looked up from her knitting, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't time for her children's usual monthly visit. She rose slowly, peering through the window. "Sarah?" she whispered, recognizing her daughter's car. Sarah, her face lined with worry, stepped out and hurried to the door. Clara opened it just as Sarah reached the porch, her daughter's concern written all over her face. "Mum, are you all right?" Sarah's voice was edged with anxiety as she embraced Clara. "I'm fine, dear. What brings you home so suddenly?" Clara replied, patting her daughter's back. Sarah pulled back, her eyes scanning Clara's face. "I've been worried. Your last letter sounded off. I had to see for myself." Clara smiled weakly. "You didn't need to worry. Michael's been helping me." "Michael?" Sarah's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "The boy from next door?" "He's not a boy anymore," Clara said, guiding Sarah into the house. "He's been a great help." As they entered the kitchen, Sarah saw Michael fixing a loose cabinet hinge. He turned and smiled warmly. "Sarah, it's good to see you." "Michael, I didn't expect to find you here," Sarah said, her tone guarded. Michael wiped his hands on a cloth and stood up. "I ran into your mum at the market. I've been helping out a bit." Sarah looked between Michael and her mother, her wariness evident. "Thank you, Michael. I'm glad someone's been here for her." Clara touched Sarah's arm. "He's been wonderful, Sarah. Really." Sarah's eyes softened, but she still seemed uncertain. "Well, I'm here now. I'll take over from here." Michael nodded, understanding. "Of course, I'm happy to help whenever you need." Throughout the day, Sarah watched as Michael moved around the house, fixing things that had long been neglected. She noticed the way Clara seemed lighter, more at ease in his presence. Michael's easy manner and genuine concern were undeniable. As the afternoon turned to evening, Sarah in the kitchen with Michael, preparing dinner. The silence between them was comfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. "Michael, I really appreciate what you've done," Sarah said finally, her voice sincere but hesitant. Michael glanced at her, sensing the underlying question. "Your mum has always been there for me. It's the least I can do." Sarah nodded, stirring a pot on the stove. "I remember you spending a lot of time here when we were kids. Mum always said you were like another son to her." Michael smiled at the memory. "She's always had a big heart." The evening meal was filled with quiet conversation and shared memories. Sarah watched as Michael made Clara laugh, the sound like music to her ears. It had been too long since she had seen her mother so happy. Later, after dinner, Sarah and Michael sat on the porch while Clara rested inside. The evening air was cool, and the stars began to peek out from the darkening sky. "Thank you, Michael," Sarah said softly, "for everything." Michael shrugged, a modest smile on his face. "I'm just glad I could help." Sarah turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You've done more than that. I haven't seen her this happy in years." Michael looked down, kicking a pebble with his shoe. "She deserves to be happy. She's done so much for everyone else." Sarah reached out, touching his arm lightly. "You're a good person, Michael." He met her gaze, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "I've just been doing what feels right." As the days passed, Sarah's initial wariness gave way to genuine appreciation. She and Michael fell into a rhythm, sharing responsibilities and caring for Clara together. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives and dreams for the future. Brookville had a quiet charm, with its tree-lined streets and close-knit community. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Michael fell into a comfortable routine, their days filled with small tasks and shared moments. One crisp morning, they decided to tackle Clara's overgrown garden. Michael arrived early, armed with gardening tools and a thermos of coffee. Clara watched from the porch, her face soft with affection as Michael and Sarah worked side by side, pulling weeds and planting new flowers. "You've got quite the green thumb," Michael remarked, wiping sweat from his brow. Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the whole garden. "It's mostly Mom's doing. I'm just following her lead." Clara smiled from her rocking chair. "You're both doing wonderfully. The garden hasn't looked this good in years." Later, in the kitchen, they prepared lunch together. Michael chopped vegetables while Sarah stirred a pot of soup. "So, what's your story, Michael?" Sarah asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "What brought you back to Brookville?" Michael paused, considering his answer. "I just want rest. Coming back here, it just felt like the right thing to do." Sarah nodded, understanding. "Sometimes it takes a while to find where you belong." As the soup simmered, Clara shuffled into the kitchen, her steps slow but determined. Michael was at her side in an instant, offering his arm for support. "Thank you, Michael," Clara said, her voice steady but tired. "I'm not as spry as I used to be." "You don't have to thank me, Clara," Michael replied gently. "I'm happy to help." Sarah watched the exchange, her heart warming at the sight of Michael's care for her mother. She could see the genuine affection in his eyes, the same care she felt. In the evenings, after Clara had gone to bed, Sarah and Michael would sit on the porch, the cool night air a welcome respite. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and their plans for the future. "I've been thinking about starting my own restaurant," Michael confessed one night, his voice filled with quiet determination. Sarah looked at him intrigued. "Really? That's amazing. What inspired you?" Michael smiled, a touch of nostalgia in his eyes. "Clara, actually. I spent so many afternoons in her kitchen as a kid. She taught me how to cook, how to find joy in it. I want to create something that honors that." Sarah felt a surge of admiration for Michael. His passion was palpable, and it made her see him in a new light. "That's a beautiful idea, Michael. Mum would be so proud." As their bond deepened, Sarah couldn't ignore the nagging frustration she felt towards her brothers. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, she decided to confront them. She stood in the living room, phone in hand, as Michael sat nearby. "Why haven't you been helping Mom?" Sarah's voice was sharp, edged with anger. "You take her money and leave her with nothing. Do you even care?" Her brother's responses were filled with excuses and dismissive remarks, only fueling Sarah's anger. "She deserves better," she said firmly, "and I won't let you neglect her any longer." After the call, Sarah sank onto the couch, her frustration giving way to exhaustion. Michael moved closer, his presence a comforting anchor. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "She needs you to stand up for her." Sarah looked at him, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." He reached out, his hand covering hers. The days continued to pass in a blur of activity and quiet moments. Sarah and Michael's relationship grew stronger. They laughed together, shared stories, and found solace in each other's company. One afternoon, as Clara rested in her favorite armchair, Michael and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, a shared worry hanging in the air. "She's getting weaker, isn't she?" Michael's voice was low, almost a whisper. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the worn tabletop. She is. I see it every day. She needs us more than ever. Michael reached out, his hand covering hers. We'll get through this together. She's not alone, and neither are you. Their evenings were spent in quiet companionship. After Clara went to bed, they would sit on the porch, the cool night air a welcome relief from the day's worries. One such evening, Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaustion evident in her posture. I'm scared, Michael, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'd do without you here. Michael turned to her, his expression earnest. You don't have to worry about that. I'm not going anywhere. A soft breeze rustled the leaves, and Sarah closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. She felt Michael's hand brush a stray hair from her face, a simple gesture that carried so much weight. Thank you, she murmured, her eyes meeting his. Michael's gaze was steady. For what? For being here, for caring, for everything. As Clara's health continued to decline, the signs became more apparent. She tired easily, her breath coming in shallow gasps after even the smallest exertion. Sarah and Michael adapted their routines to accommodate her needs, their dedication unwavering. One morning, Sarah found Clara struggling to reach a book on the top shelf of her bookcase. She hurried over, gently taking the book from Clara's hands. Mom, you need to rest, Sarah said, her tone gentle but firm. Clara sighed, her strength waning. I hate feeling like this, Sarah. Like I'm a burden. You're not a burden, Sarah replied, her voice steady. We love you, and we want to take care of you. Michael entered the room, a cup of tea in hand. Here, Clara, drink this. It'll help you feel better. Clara accepted the tea with a grateful smile. You're both too good to me. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Michael glanced at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of tenderness and resolve. Do you ever think about the future? He asked, his voice soft. Sarah nodded, her gaze distant. I do. But it's hard to imagine a future without worrying about Mom. Michael reached out, taking her hand. We'll face it together. Whatever happens, we'll get through it. Sarah turned to him, a small smile playing at her lips. You've become a rock for me, Michael. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to find out, he replied, his grip tightening on her hand. I'm here. For you and for Clara. Their growing intimacy was evident in the small, everyday moments. Michael would adjust Sarah's collar when it was askew, and she would brush a strand of hair from his face with a tenderness that spoke volumes. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Clara dozed in her chair. Sarah leaned against Michael, her head resting on his shoulder. You know, I think we're going to be all right, she said softly. Michael pressed a kiss to her forehead. I know we will be. As the sun set over Brookville, casting a golden glow over the town, the house seemed to exhale a sigh of contentment. Despite the challenges, despite the uncertainty of the future, there was a sense of peace. Sarah and Michael's love for Clara and for each other created a sanctuary of strength and hope. One evening, as the sun set over the shimmering lake, Sarah and Michael sat on the porch of the new house, sipping coffee and contemplating the upcoming move. Michael, I'm worried about Mom, Sarah began, her voice heavy with concern. She's getting weaker, and I think it's time for her to move in with me. Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I've noticed it too. She needs more care than she's getting now. Sarah sighed, her gaze distant. It's not just about care. I want her to be with family, where she feels loved and secure. Michael reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's. "We'll make it happen, Sarah, whatever it takes." The next morning, Sarah broached the subject with Clara. They sat in the cozy living room, sunlight streaming through the windows. "Mum, I've been thinking," Sarah began, her tone gentle yet resolute. "I want you to move in with me after graduation. You'll be more comfortable here, and I can take better care of you." Clara looked at her daughter, a mixture of surprise and reluctance in her eyes. "Sarah, I don't want to be a burden. You have your life to live." "You're not a burden, Mum," Sarah insisted, her voice firm. "You're my family. I want to do this." Clara's eyes softened, but there was still hesitation. "It's a big change. I've lived in that house for so long." Sarah took her mother's hands in hers. "I know it's a lot to ask, but think about it. We'll be together, and you'll have the care you need. Please, Mom." Clara looked into her daughter's eyes, seeing the love and determination there. She nodded slowly. "All right, Sarah, I'll move in with you." The decision made, they began the daunting task of packing up Clara's old house. Michael was there every step of the way, his protective nature shining through as he carefully packed fragile items and reassured Clara that everything would be all right. As they worked, Sarah's brothers arrived, their expressions a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on here?" Tom, the eldest, demanded. "We're moving Mom into my place," Sarah replied, her tone even but unyielding. "You can't just decide that on your own," Tom retorted. "She's fine where she is." Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "No, she's not fine. She needs more care, and she deserves to be with family who will take care of her properly." Michael stepped forward, his presence calm but commanding. "Sarah's right. Clara needs this. We all want what's best for her." Tom glared at Michael, then turned back to Sarah. "We're her family too. You should have talked to us first." "I'm talking to you now," Sarah said, her voice steady. "This is happening. Mum's health and well-being come first." The tension in the room was palpable, but Sarah stood her ground, Michael by her side. After a moment, Tom's shoulders sagged, and he nodded reluctantly. With the decision finally accepted, the packing continued, a sense of purpose and unity growing stronger with each box loaded into the truck. Clara watched, her emotions a mix of sadness for leaving her old home and hope for the future. On the day of the move, the family gathered at the new house. Clara stepped inside, her eyes taking in the warm, welcoming space. "It's beautiful, Sarah," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "Welcome home, Mom." Michael stood nearby, a reassuring presence. "You're going to love it here, Clara. We'll make sure of it." As they settled in, the new house quickly became a home filled with love and care. Clara's health began to improve, surrounded by the warmth of her family. Sarah and Michael's bond grew even stronger, their shared responsibilities and mutual support deepening their connection. One evening, as they sat by the lake, Sarah looked at Michael, her heart full. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." He smiled, his hand finding hers. "We're in this together, Sarah. Always." The cozy house near the lake in Brookville had quickly become a sanctuary for Clara, Sarah, and Michael. The gentle lapping of the water, the rustling leaves, and the soft chirping of birds created a serene backdrop for their new life. The days were filled with quiet routines and shared moments, each contributing to the sense of peace that had settled over them. One morning, as Sarah was preparing breakfast, Michael walked in, a broad smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Sarah looked up, intrigued. "Good morning. You seem awfully cheerful today. What's up?" Michael pulled out a chair and sat down, leaning in conspiratorially. "I've got some news. I've secured a job at the new restaurant in town. They need a head chef, and they loved my ideas." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise and delight. "Michael, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you." He reached out, taking her hand. "I did it because I want to stay close to you and Clara. This place feels like home now." Sarah squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Michael. It means so much to us, to me." The new job brought a renewed sense of purpose to Michael. His days were filled with the bustle of the restaurant, but he always made time for Sarah and Clara. Clara watched these interactions with a heart full of hope. Despite her fluctuating health, seeing Sarah and Michael together brought her immense joy. Their love and dedication to each other and to her made the difficult days more bearable. One afternoon, as Clara sat by the window, she called Sarah over. "You know, seeing you and Michael together makes me incredibly happy," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. Sarah sat down beside her, taking her hand. "We're happy too, Mom, and we're going to make sure you're always taken care of." Clara smiled, her eyes misty. "I believe you, and I'm so grateful." As the weeks went by, there were good days and bad days for Clara. On the difficult days, Sarah and Michael worked together seamlessly, their love and support for Clara unwavering. On the good days, they celebrated small victories, cherishing the moments of laughter and joy. One evening, as they sat by the lake, Clara's gaze drifted over the water, a peaceful smile on her face. "This place has given me more than I ever imagined," she said softly. "It's given me hope for the future." Sarah and Michael sat on either side of her, their hands intertwined. "And we'll keep making it better, Mom," Sarah promised. "We'll keep dreaming and building our future together." In the cozy house by the lake, their journey continued, filled with dreams and realities that intertwined, creating a tapestry of love, resilience, and unwavering support. The future was theirs to build, one day at a time, and they embraced it with open hearts and unshakable faith in each other. One crisp morning, as the leaves began to turn golden, Clara sat on the porch, a knitted shawl draped over her shoulders. She watched as Sarah and Michael prepared breakfast in the kitchen, their easy camaraderie and quiet laughter drifting through the open window. Clara's thoughts wandered to the past, to the years filled with struggles and sacrifices. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the present, for the love and care that now surrounded her. She felt a deep contentment, knowing that her daughter was in good hands and that they had found a true partner in Michael. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah and Michael joined Clara on the porch, bringing a tray of coffee and freshly baked muffins. "Morning, Mum," Sarah said, placing a cup in front of Clara. "How did you sleep?" "Like a baby," Clara replied, her eyes twinkling. "This place has a way of soothing my old bones." Michael sat down beside Sarah, his gaze soft as he looked at Clara. "We're glad you're comfortable here, Clara. That's all that matters." The morning passed in quiet conversation and shared smiles. Clara observed the subtle touches between Sarah and Michael, the way their hands would brush, or their eyes would meet and hold. She saw a depth of affection growing between them, and it warmed her heart. Later that day, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the lake, Michael and Sarah walked down to the water's edge. Clara watched from the porch, sensing that something significant was about to happen. They stood in silence for a moment, the gentle breeze playing with Sarah's hair. Michael took a deep breath, turning to face her. "Sarah, there's something I've been meaning to say," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "These past few months have been incredible. Being here with you and Clara has shown me what truly matters. I can't imagine my life without you." Sarah's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "I feel the same way, Michael. You've become so important to me. I don't want to think about a future without you in it." Michael reached out, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Sarah, more than I ever thought possible. I want to build a life with you, to face whatever comes our way together." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek, but she smiled, her heart full. "I love you too, Michael, and I want nothing more than to spend my life with you." They embraced, the lake's serene beauty a backdrop to their heartfelt confession. Clara, watching from a distance, felt a profound sense of joy. She knew that her daughter was loved and that they had found a true partner in Michael. As the days turned into weeks, their new life took shape. Clara found solace in the small routines and the love that filled their home. Sarah and Michael's relationship flourished, their dreams intertwined with a shared vision for the future. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fire, Clara looked at Sarah and Michael, her heart brimming with contentment. "You two have given me more than I ever hoped for," she said softly. "Seeing you together, happy and in love, is the greatest gift." Sarah leaned over, hugging her mother. "We're all in this together, Mum. We're a family, and we'll face everything that comes our way." Michael nodded, his eyes meeting Clara's. "We'll take care of each other. Always." The warmth of the fire, the comforting presence of her daughter and Michael, and the promise of a bright future enveloped Clara. She closed her eyes, picturing the years ahead filled with love, laughter, and family. As the flames flickered and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Clara felt a deep peace. She knew that they were on the right path, that they had found a harmony that would carry them through any challenge. And with that thought, she allowed herself to drift into a restful sleep, content in the knowledge that her daughter was loved and cared for. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this story unfold. I hope you found it as touching and emotional as I did while writing it. You know, I firmly believe that God always blesses those who do good. Remember, happiness will come to those who persist and stay true to their values. Story reminds us all to keep faith, to keep doing good, and to trust that even in our darkest times, there is a light guiding us toward a brighter future. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming heartwarming and inspiring stories. Your support means the world to me and helps me continue creating content that we can all connect with. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay blessed, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next video.